Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast, a video show which brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Frits Bussemaker, and today I'm delighted to have a conversation with my good friend, Daniel Erasmus. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Frits.
Allow me to introduce Daniel. He's a native from South Africa. Since the mid of the 90s, he is a futurist and scenario planner, a fellow and visiting professor at various universities. And foremost, he's the director of the Digital Thinking Network, DTN, with clients like Shell, Schlumberger, Vodafone, Nokia City of Rotterdam, and also the inventor and the CEO of NEWSCONSOLE. Now, your work has brought you in contact with all sorts of people, from Nobel Laureates, inventors, and even one of the sushi masters of the Emperor of Japan. So I'm interested to find out more about that. And finally, you're a columnist and a writer, so you have a couple of books under your name as well, including Innovation from the Edge. So again, Daniel, thank you for joining us. And could you please tell us, because the main topic today is going to be about scenario planning. What actually is that?
So I was trained in scenario planning by the old Shell guard. Really, Arie de Geus, back in the day. So we're talking, 20 plus years ago, in the early 90s, sat together with me and said, "You should be doing this." And there's been a great mentor to this. And Arie always viewed scenarios as, everything we do today, we do in anticipation of tomorrow. So we're having this interview, you're listening to this interview, everything that we do today is looking towards the future. But you take managers and you walk behind them with a little stopwatch and you ask, how much time do they actually spend about talking about their assumptions of the future? It's less than 2%. And this is shocking. So we spent 98 something % doing stuff for something we never really critically examine. And so scenarios is the process of saying, stop.
Yeah.
Let's take a step back, try to see what the world could look like, not what it might look like, but what it could look like. And I always say scenarios are always plural, like a marriage, like a harbor. Those things are always plural. There's always two of them. A harbor, you're shipping it to something. And so scenarios, you never have one view on the future. The future is always plural. There are multiple futures. And rather than having to discuss and saying, is it this future? Will COVID impact the economy in this way or in that way? And then you have your experts and they debate it with each other. Or will this be the nature of AI, this thing or that thing? What you say in scenarios is, that discussion isn't very valuable. The discussion is better on saying, if this happens, what do we do? And if that happens, what do we do? And suddenly you end up in a very different discussion and a whole set of other actions than you wouldn't have taken otherwise. And so scenarios really are just stories about the future that you tell to challenge yourself and others to think about the world with a new pair of eyes.
Got it. Now, you've alluded to a couple of the benefits scenario planning offers, but could you take us through them? What are the benefits of doing good scenario planning?
The simplest is really to take you to a decision-making room. I want to take you into a room, and assuming that the audience is somewhat technically versed, I want to take you to 1980. And so in 1980, the board of IBM wanted to know what's the size of the computing market by 2000. So we know now. And they came up with a number, and they had 3 numbers, and it was calculated, and the numbers we all know is wrong. So imagine you're a time traveler, and you go back to 1980, and you're in the boardroom, and you go, I've got the right number. Here it is. I'm a time traveler, and you give that number. So what is the difference? So if you take an A4 page, they had 3 estimates. And you can download the study. It's called the year 2000 study. And you look at the best estimate, and it's an A4 page, and you say, well, how high is the real number?
Yeah.
As high as the screen, as high as the room. It's a 40-story high building. So their best estimate, which is this big, next to a 40-story building, that is the difference. And so it's not sensitivity around, a little bit less, a little bit there. It's really different assumptions. Now imagine you go into that room and you tell them, I've got the right number. It's not this, but it's 40 stories higher than what you're looking at the moment. And how long will it take until the management goes, thank you for sharing, good luck, goodbye.
Yeah.
Before that board throws you out. So the story we tell ourselves about futures, it's always important that we get it right. And that we get it. And if only we had known, and if only and you'll see in the age of uncertainties, every minister goes there and say, if only we had known, or they go, if only we had known about, if only we knew that we needed glass for the vaccines, if only we, and what Scenarios does is it takes that out of the conversation, because you're thinking ahead and you're asking yourselves, well, what if we're here? What does the world look like? And by having these multiple futures, suddenly we start and say, oh, hang on, if this could happen, we start preparing for it. And so you prepare for uncertain futures and you take the surprise out of business. And that matters.
Okay, we'll come to the surprise a little bit later, but because I'm thinking immediately of black swans. But one of the things which triggered me in your answer is, could you maybe explain it to me, the difference between scenario planning and being a futurist? Because there's so many people out there who predict the future and sometimes are laughed at because they're ridiculous ideas. So what's the difference between what you're doing and what a futurist does?
So there's a very old Buddhist saying, and Buddhism really is, Hinduism for export, so Buddhism. And so there's an old Buddhist saying, and it's a Zen saying, but it's so old, it's actually Chinese Zen, so before Zen came. And it says, if you meet Buddha by the side of the road, kill him. And you're like, hang on, we're not going to kill Buddha, this is Buddha, and the saying goes to say that anybody who claims that they're Buddha is wrong, because the Buddha isn't found outside, it's found inside, and it's not there, it's found inside. And so obviously not physically kill them, but what you're doing is you're saying anybody who claims to know the future is wrong. There is no knowledge about the future. Nobody here is the guru that knows the future or anything like that. Anybody who claims that is claiming to be a Buddha, and that makes no sense. The future, we don't know. So you have to come to this space with humility. And instead of playing the management guru game of I will go and listen to this person and they will give us the 10 mega trends, and from those mega trends, we'll make big fat reports. And what it really does is you just increase your myopia, because you're not looking at 11 or 12 or 13. You're now looking at that 10. And that 10 has been told by the best experts, which you've paid a fortune to talk with. And you can get 20, 30, 40 of them. You can pick. And they're futurists, and they tell us what the future is like, as if it's some strange place that they know better. No, we're constantly surprised by the future. So we need to shift our discussion from trying to get the perfect list of 10 into talking about uncertainty, looking at uncertainty, seeing what that implies, and then see what do we do. And by talking not by the future, but by multiple futures, and talking about what do we do if this happens, we change the whole nature of the discussion. We put ourselves into this, and we can act. And we can act in novel, surprising, exciting ways to create a very different world. So I like to say the futures are the enemy.
I got it. I understand the difference now. So thank you for clarifying that. Now, this reminds me a bit of an anecdote I once heard, where how you, as a scenario planner, was confronted almost, I would say, with your work in a sense. And the way I remember it is somebody knocked on your door and said, I think you're stealing our trade secrets because you're sharing something which you should not know. Because this is a very much a corporate secret. So how come you know about this? Could you explain to me a little bit what happened and what the key takeaway is for all those other organizations out there?
Look, it was nothing as dramatic as that. It was simply just a meeting. And I see these stories as they come on, they kind of get exciting and stuff like this. And yes, you know, there's been a lot of dramatic things in our careers of supporting decision making. You know, we've facilitated multi-billion-dollar decision making and these things. So there's a lot of other, but for some reason, this story. It was the combination of scenario thinking, scenario planning. I prefer scenario thinking than planning, and our AI platform. So we have an AI platform, and we read billions and billions and billions of articles, and then separate that out into the news, and then from that, you distill it into the news, which is written by humans for normal consumption, not by machines to influence media, etc. So it really goes down to a very, very small part of that. But we do that at the scale of the planet. So we often say we do planetary scale natural language processing or planetary scale AI. And when you look at the whole planet, we get to see things that very few people on Earth get to see. And so this was an extremely large. So at the time, it was one of the largest companies on Earth. And I had a meeting with the group there. And, you know, as you prepare for these meetings, we typed it into our system. And I said, you know, this and the future of the domain. And I could very clearly see that there was a focus on one area, but they were moving into another area. When it was from the graph, you could really see that. Now, this wasn't written in any article explicitly anywhere, but you could really see that within this thing. So I sat in the meeting and I stood up to them and I said, guys, this is the head of security. So he's responsible for the security of hundreds of thousands of people and the confidentiality of the secrets of the board and these type of things in a very nice wood paneled room. And I said, guys, it looks like you're this company, but you're becoming that company, if we could see from the data. And then suddenly, the mood of the meeting changed. Everybody was like, what did we just hear? And I called the person who was like, did I miss something? Was this, you know, why is this? And they're like, we want to sign a contract with you today. And I said, well, normally we buy a drink first, you know, what is the rush here? And they said, no, today. And by the way, it needs an NDA. And apparently, when we spun up these graphs and look at all the little bits which were there and you put them together, you could see a direction which is their biggest secret. They were about to do tens of billions of dollar acquisition. And they were shocked that somebody could see that in public data. And so from putting public data together in novel ways, we could see things that very few people on Earth. And I always like to say the biggest secrets in the world are quite public. To see, you know, if you have the right tooling, and time again, you can do this. Where you can look literally decades ahead in fields, on areas that you wouldn't have been able to see. And it doesn't mean it's right, and it doesn't mean it's perfect. It doesn't mean anything like that. But it gives you a new way of looking at the world.
Well, Daniel, that's my point to share that to at least make all those corporates and other organizations out there aware that all that information in the public domain actually is much more powerful than you realize. If you look at the individual data assets, it's nothing. But if you add it up, you get a situation you just described.
Yes, we need to get from beyond of parsing news like little bit by little bit by little bit. And you know, there's this wonderful book, a Micrographia, it's in the public domain now, by Robert Hooke. And he made this little lens from von Leeuwenhoek, you know, which is you know, a Dutch treasure here. And by putting a few little lenses together, an entirely different world. And he made drawings of lice. He made drawings of all kinds of creatures, big and small, the eyes of a fly. And they weren't great microscopes, but they were good enough. And just go look, Micrographia. And it's an incredibly beautiful book. And you can imagine, 400 years ago at the Age of Enlightenment, when this world opened up, that was right there, but nobody saw it. And just with a little bit of different tooling, suddenly a whole other dimension is revealed. And we think of our space in this thing, is there's a world there in which you understand how things fit together, where is the vulnerabilities, what is the wars to come, those things. And with a slightly different kind of tooling, one can see these vistas. And that's a very powerful ability to bring to the table, because it's an uncertain world, things are changing all the time. And where is your organization's system to, not good luck, maybe you had the right conversation with the person, or in the corridors, the virtual corridors, where is this system to structurally anticipate uncertainty, which we know the world is there, act on it, and take novel, exciting new futures to, in the end, reduce your risk and not just be a subject of the storm, but be a master of the wave.
Got it. Hey, Daniel, to what extent, because I promised I'd come back to that, to what extent was COVID a black swan? Could we have predicted this happening? Yeah, so I have a little bit of a pet issue with a black swan thing. So, God bless Olivia, it's a very nice book and it's lovely done. And he's just a fantastic author and thinker. But, and this is always the but, and the kind of things we mention as black swans, global pandemic, global financial crisis, these type of things. Global financial crisis, we anticipated in 2006 that there's a global financial crisis coming, wrote a book about it, advised a bank which was working on it, and that bank in 2008, when the whole industry was collapsing around it, made $2.5 billion of profit. Its biggest profit in 150-year existence, while the entire industry was collapsing around that. Now, that's not just because of our scenarios, which anticipated a crisis. It was because they had conservative financing, they were fantastically run. The scenarios helped. By the time that the management saw what was going on, they recognized this means that. All the other banks were kind of blind to what that means, because they had thought a little bit ahead in the game. They had seen a little bit further. Now, and that matters because they're still in their own command. So this changes the outcomes of empires, looking a little bit ahead. In terms of COVID, by the time, and I remember this, I was in Davos, and I literally saw Trump's car kind of drive through the snow on the way to his helicopter, and we all waved goodbye. It was a moment treasured. And so what happened there was the first reports, this was kind of January, end of January 2020. So it was just at the end of Davos. And so the first kind of reports were coming out on this. And so by that time, we had done 3 sets of scenarios about global pandemics before. So we had done one for the Dutch government, the consortium of ministers, 5 ministries in the Dutch government. We had done that on that, what does a global pandemic look like? And we had done one for a bank, what does a global pandemic look like? And we had done one for a consortium, so multi-client process of retailers, what does a global pandemic look like? And what would that mean to retail, banking, to governance and these things? So we probably spent about 6 months to a year looking at pandemics before it happened. So by the time in January, when we saw it leave there in the first round, we had a pretty good idea what was coming on, And so to our clients, we issued a bulletin and said, listen, guys, these are the scenarios. This is what's going on. This is very different. And get prepared. And did they listen?
Yes, yes. Much of those things I can't talk about, unfortunately, because it's very recent. One of the things I can talk about. So we worked with a large bank. So think, $300 billion plus company. Some of the largest, bigger than Goldman Sachs. It's a very significant institution. So it sounds all very big, but turning those things is very challenging. And they said, can you help? Tell us what's the implications of COVID, not the V and the W or any of those things, but what are the implications of COVID? And can your artificial intelligence platform also help in creating a system of practice? And we've been working with them. So we developed a set of COVID scenarios that we complemented with our AI. And it's in that complementarity that some magic happens. So we were looking at this, anticipated the Capitol riots from Donald Trump, actually. That's a different discussion. But we talked about that in April 2020, And we were tracking it by mid-May. We were tracking the Oath Keepers, all of those things inside a view that talked about the second American Civil War, which is the name they used for that. And so what we noticed in looking at this is that everybody was thinking about COVID, but there was a greater risk, not the greater risk, but a risk coming. And in the world of the 7.8 billion people, there are about 150 million people that are acutely food deprived, hungry, and not hungry, very hungry. So some of them are famished, but not all of them. And the director of the World Food Program reported and talked about this and saying their estimates were at the beginning of a hunger of biblical proportions. And that 150 will go up to about 250 because of COVID, because people can't plant, and then the market stopped working and all of those things. And suddenly people who are at the margin get pushed down and it becomes a very, very different world. And so what we said is we work together and we recognize this. And the team said, no. We said, but look here, this is the evidence because we can analyze these things at scale. This is where it's coming. And so they said, we're going to act. And so by seeing the black swan before it happens, which we've done for the pandemic, now we're using AI to see the black swan before it happens. And suddenly the whole management team recognized the urgency of this action. And they changed a very small side project to say, we're going to do something very different than agriculture. Everybody that worked on that understood because they had looked ahead. And within 3 months, they had an application in the hands of farmers already and bringing markets together. And the normal response would be, let's sponsor a bit of food and let's kind of do this, etc., etc. And we worked together and said, let's do a root cause analysis. And hunger happens not because there's not enough production of food supply, but it happens because of market failure. So the food which is there, the Nobel Prize was won on this, doesn't reach the people who need the food. So the market itself fails, or other mechanisms, depending on how you look at this. So those things don't really. And so what way could you not just supply dry goods, but could you make markets work better? So you go a little bit deeper to understand where's the high leverage point, that little thing that you could change, that really changes everything. And so by end of last year, this app, which was in the hands, supplied 1 million meals and in 1 month. And this year, we plan, it's not out yet, but it's expected that it will supply 36 million meals to people. Now, that doesn't need to be 36. It should be 100. It should be 1 billion meals. I'm not saying that this is going to solve everything, but it's a story about how an organization could see the world anew, act, understand where is the root cause to do that, use AI and human intelligence together to do that, and really change the outcomes of a lot of people in doing that. And that's the problem, is in our head, how we look at the world in our heads. And as long as we keep telling it, we can't do it, we can't think about it because of black swans and all of that, we blind our eyes.
Daniel,
very differently.
Yeah. Hey, Daniel, very fascinating stories you're sharing with us. And unfortunately, we're almost running out of time. So I'd actually like to end you with two, let's say, more personal questions, because as it shows, I see passion. You just, it's oozing passion about scenario planning. Do you have any idea where that passion comes from with you?
Look, I love what I do, and that's just wonderful. You couldn't be more luckier than that. It didn't come. This job didn't exist when I started, so you had to make it. And I'm always inspired by a friend of mine, Ufa, who says, don't try to get a job, try to make a job. And the same with what you do. Yeah. These things didn't exist until you make it. And it couldn't be more fortunate. You're sitting in a situation where you work with the top of the organizations in the world, and you develop a basis of trust to say that, we're here not to threaten your business, not to do anything like this, but we're here because you would rather be surprised in the meeting than in the market. And this is the art of bringing these incredible insights into discussions and having some of the most powerful parties in the world do things that they never imagined, and do things to great commercial success. It's not that, we'll take a little bit of money and we'll put it on CRM. We're at the beginning. What we've just seen in COVID is a dry run for climate change. And, Cicero used to say, I'm just finishing an article, 2,000 years ago, Cicero used to say, you can't fight the weather. We can't fight the weather. Well, because of climate change, we will have to. And so thinking ahead and doing these things really matters to us, our children, ourselves, everybody. And I couldn't be happier to be in the circumstance to help.
Now you made it clear to me, at least, where the passion comes from, because you have an opportunity to change pretty good.
Yeah. I didn't answer your question really. Sorry.
Well, you did answer it, almost implied, as it were. So now I'm very happy with that. Maybe one last thing from my side, Daniel, before we have to go, unfortunately. What's your takeaway to the world, given your insights in scenario planning? What do you want to share?
I think that we have global challenges in ways generations before us certainly didn't have. And I'm talking also my children and their, my passion comes from, looking at my 3 daughters and son and just seeing, the amazing world that they're making and will be part of. We tend to look at the world in terms of challenges and doom and gloom, but the world has, more people than ever before in the history of humanity are living longer, happier, healthier lives than ever before in humanity. The Millennium Development Goals were exceeded. Nobody thought that they'll make them. They were exceeded by the hundreds of millions of people are not living in poverty. The greatest achievement of the 20th century, women's suffrage. Sometimes it feels like suffering as well. But women's suffrage, education, women's education is electrification of our entire space as being just the most incredible human achievements. And people are living, and also, to be quite fair, largely many of those things is because of China's ascendance. And following that, India's ascendance. This is the most exciting time in the world. Within the next few years, $6 billion will be spent on greening transportation and making it zero carbon. We're in front of the biggest business and transformation opportunity in generations to deal with, get all of these carbon out, that we don't put more carbon in the air, and then get all the carbon out of the air. And there are realistic, viable technological avenues. We just worked together on 153 game-changing breakthroughs with Europe's largest technology company to track that, change those things, and enable those technical technologies there. So this is a future not to be negotiated somewhere far away from you. This is a future we get to make. But if we want to make it, we've got to be smarter and look at the future as multiple futures, as plural, think further and think in these multiple futures and ask ourselves, what would I do if I'm there? What would we do if we're there? And sometimes you get to say, what can we make to achieve this? Because in the end, if you don't pick up and say, how can I make a positive influence on the world? You're not doing much.
Daniel, that's a great takeaway. And my take is from this discussion we've had is a lot of things to which we need to be warned about, but we can make our own future as long as we have an insight in what's happening. So for the brand called You, I want to thank you so much for your insights, and great you're here.
Thank you, Fritz, and you're doing it with these podcasts.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.